Today, we're going to do two things. We're going to talk basic card layout, and we're also going to give you some ideas for using some card scraps. In terms of a basic card layout, this thing is the card base. It's a cover front, and then it's a focal point. And of course, as you think about layouts, that focal point can be anything you want. Here it's a sentiment. This main piece can be almost out to the edges with just a thin framing of the card base behind it, or you can make it smaller and have more of the card base showing. But today I want to focus on that pink piece. I am going to digress for a minute and talk about the focal point because I'm going to show you 3 more cards today, and they're all going to have the same focal point because our conversation today is about the back piece. So the focal point today, I wanted to use something that kind of dressed it up a little bit, so I chose the square vellum doilies. Because it's vellum and see-through, I needed something that was going to help it to stand out from the background, so I put that black circle behind the vellum doily. I also raised that vellum doily up on dimensionals. You can see them there, I think, in the camera. And that just gives more visual depth because it's physically layered off the background piece. I wanted my sentiment on white and I want it to really stand out, so I just used the tailored tag punch behind there to add a little bit more color in there so that it wasn't just black, white, and pink, but it was 2 tones of pink. Enough for the focal point because it's going to be basically the same on all the cards. So let's talk about the pink piece and let's talk about the basic design. This square vellum doily, I put it at an angle, tilted at 45 degrees. You could have put it square. I could have made this, I did make this a horizontal card. You could also have made it into a vertical card. But what if we replace the pink piece with a piece of designer paper? That looks very pretty. Here's the designer paper. On this one, my vellum doily is squared up with the page. And then I used yellow on there to coordinate with the designer paper. But I said today that we were going to talk about scraps. So instead of the pink and instead of the designer paper, I actually used the scraps to make my own. And what you're going to see next is a video that was part of something that I did for my team who had gotten together to make the card. So you're going to see that, and then I'll come back. Scrappy card made from scraps. It can be any shape. It can be cardstock. It can be designer paper. I had several partial sheets left from this pack, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to use them up. And I chose to cut them into triangular pieces. You could do them in straight strips. You could do them in any shape at all. So this is a card that I did out of some scraps a while ago, and I actually made a very formal pattern by punching the scraps with a tailored tag punch. And then I also brought some cardstock in here because I didn't have enough of the scraps of the designer paper. I didn't have this out last night, but I actually dug through my samples and found a whole bunch more examples that I've saved of using scraps on cardstock. So this one is just the colored cardstock cut in real thin strips and then leaving a little break in there so that you can kind of, because this is, yeah, you can see that the words are on the card base itself, and I just cut those strips short. This one I made. This one I got as a trade card. Isn't that pretty? So this is using some designer paper here, and then the rest of it is just accent colors. Here's another one. Those of you who know Norma, this is one that Norma made. So she did hers as the background for the inside, and then if you were going to write a note on it, you could write the note into that space. This, by the way, is what we call a Z-fold. These are examples of what's called a starburst pattern. So instead of having your triangular cut-shaped pieces just go vertically up and down the card, this one, you have all their points seem to be coming from one place. So this is one that I did last fall with that real pretty designer paper that we were selling. Here's another one also that I did last fall. Here's another one I got as a trade card where all those rays seem to come from the same point to that card. This one, the point they all seem to come from is sort of random, right in the middle of the card, and then they all just go out from there. This was one from one of our events years ago. This was from one of our big demonstrator events. This one I did show last night, where the central point they all seem to come from is like a shoulder of the heart. So this is just a great way, if you've got scraps, don't throw them away. You can make something really awesome and pretty, and then I will show you how we did that really quickly. Before I do, I'm just going to point out a difference here between two of these. So first of all, on this one, the designer paper pieces are all right next to each other with no space showing in between. And on this one, I pulled them apart from each other a little bit so that you're seeing the white cardstock show through. And this one is on black cardstock, so you see the black cardstock showed through because they're spread apart a little bit. And then realize it doesn't have to cover the whole front of the card, that you can have your you can use as your base something that's less than the front of the card. So I had some extra white space showing down here because my sentiment was going to fill in some of that space. So it goes together really easily. You're just going to take your card pieces like this. If you're not going to have any of the background color show through, you can take your tape and you can just cover the whole front of your paper with the tape and then lay your pieces on. If you are going to have some of that black show through, then you're going to have to and just put your tape on each individual piece. So something like this, and I'm not even covering the whole front. I just laid some down. I do want to make sure that I kind of catch the sides of it. Then you're just going to bring those pieces in and start laying them on the cardstock. So once again, you take your pattern in your paper and just, wherever it looks good. So once you get all these pieces done, then you flip it to the back side. And at that point, you can use your paper trimmer, or you can just come in with your scissors and trim off the edges. And then you've got your piece to put on the card. You can use this on the card in any way that you might use a piece of colored paper as a backdrop or a piece of designer paper as a backdrop. And then instead of having a single sheet of designer paper, you have this piece that you've created with the scraps. I have these two samples. I'm going to show you one more thing and then I'm going to finish up the card real quickly. I used a black base, and for this one I had some of the black showing through. So I wanted to make sure I had a solid black base. For this one, I put all those pieces of designer paper right up next to each other. If there had been a hole in my black base, no one would have known. So when you're talking about using scraps, because I'm going to use this piece right here for finishing my card, so I had to punch it from a piece. There could have easily been holes in the back of this and no one would have known. So that would be another way that you could use some of your scraps. All right, let's finish up these cards quickly. All right, you can see how this card design could work with a piece of colored cardstock as the background, a piece of designer paper as the background, or your scrappy element that you created as the background. Now you need something that's going to set off the focal point. What I'm going to use is something that is totally underloved in my stamping room, which is these doilies. So they fit nicely as a square. They fit this way, diagonal. You could have a vertical card and have this raised up, or more centered. You could have it squared off, put your main focal point up here and put a sentiment down here. I'm going to have this sitting square in the middle of my page. Now, this is very busy background. This is vellum and it's see-through, so I want something that's going to set it off a little bit. I just punched a circle for myself. So now it's going to sit up and it's going to look a little more lacy. I want my sentiment to be on white paper, but I want that to be more of a focal point. So this is my plan for layering the parts. I'm going to use dimensionals to set this off a little bit also. So this piece is going to be, oh, see, there's scraps. I had something stamped on the back of that. Right in the middle of the card. And then using the dimensionals is going to visually add a little bit more depth to the card so that that vellum will be not quite so lost in the very busy background. There. See, having those dimensionals really makes a difference to set that off visually. You can see the difference between this one that's just sitting on the background and this one that's raised up. So there we have one mounted square and one mounted rotated 90 degrees. So I hope that gave you some idea for using your scraps. I hope that gave you some ideas for things that you can show your friends when they look to you for ideas with stamping. All right, so you just watched how easy it was to use the scraps, starting with a basic design, which could either be horizontal or vertical. It could be cardstock, it could be designer paper, or you could create your own visual interest for the backdrop using up some of your scrap paper. If you found this useful, please give it a thumbs up. If you think other people would find it useful, please go ahead and share. And if you'd like to get notifications of future videos that I do, then make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell so that you get those notifications. I'm Katie Johnson, and thanks for watching.